Welcome to Planet Poetry, the podcast about poets and poetry. I'm Peter Kenny.
And I'm Robin Houghton.
And today we have a bit of a weather theme going on. We'll be dipping our toe into how poets employ climate in their works.
We're going to be talking with poet Clare and also with the editor of a new literary magazine with an environmental frame. So first of all, Peter, I think you've got a poem for us.
Yes, I have a poem called Rain by Edward Thomas, one of my favourite poems of all time. It's a bit bleak, but then, hey, it's rain. Rain. Rain, midnight rain, nothing but the wild rain on this bleak hut, and solitude, and me, remembering again that I shall die, and neither hear the rain nor give it thanks for washing me cleaner than I have been since I was born into this solitude. Blessed are the dead that the rain rains upon, but here I pray that none whom once I loved is dying tonight, or lying still awake, solitary, listening to the rain, either in pain or thus in sympathy, helpless among the living and the dead, like a cold water among broken reeds, myriads of broken reeds all still and stiff, like me who have no love which this wild rain has not dissolved, except the love of death. If love it be for what is perfect and cannot, the tempest tells me, disappoint. So I believe he wrote that while sitting in a hut waiting to be sent off to the First World War, where he sadly met his end. But it's a beautiful poem, I think.
It is beautiful, but it's, as you say, it's heartbreaking, really. I mean, one says that in retrospect because we know what happened to him, and
it's got that pathetic fallacy going on that, you know, he's feeling utterly miserable and it's pouring with rain. But so maybe it's a bit on the nose, but I love it nonetheless. I do like Edward Thomas's work. He's a sort of, people talk about him as being a minor poet, but one that's well worth checking out if you don't know his work already.
And I think he's had a bit of a revival in recent years. But let's not forget, of course, that rain is associated with life-giving properties. So on that note, I'd like to share a poem by Alice Oswald, and it's from her 2016 collection, Falling Awake, which I think won several awards. Did it actually win the Elliotts? I don't know. It was up for the Elliotts.
It didn't.
It didn't win the Elliotts.
No.
It won the Costa
Poetry Award.
Costa Poetry Award.
2016.
And this is the first poem in the collection. It's called A Short Story of Falling. It is the story of the falling rain to turn into a leaf and fall again. It is the secret of a summer shower to steal the light and hide it in a flower. And every flower, a tiny tributary that from the ground flows green and momentary, is one of water's wishes. And this tale hangs in a seed head smaller than my thumbnail. If only I, a passer-by, could pass as clear as water through a plume of grass, to find the sunlight hidden at the tip, turning to seed, a kind of lifting raindrip. Then I might know, like water, how to balance the weight of hope against the light of patience. Water, which is so raw, so earthy strong, and lurks in cast iron tanks, and leaks along, down under gravity, towards my tongue, to cool and fill the pipework of this song, which is the story of the falling rain, that rises to the light and falls again.
That's a lovely antidote to the Edward Thomas, I think.
Well, a counterpoint.
Yeah.
I think it just, that poem is just the music of it, the circular. You want to read it again and again, I find. Who said Endrain was dead? Ridiculous, isn't it? It's just, I don't know, beautiful poem.
It makes me think of Blake, especially like the first 4 lines. I've got it in front of me as well by chance. It is the story of the falling rain to turn into a leaf and fall again. It is the secret of a summer shower to steal the light and hide it in a flower. And that just screams Blake at me in the best possible way.
Yes, to steal the light and hide it in a flower. It's just so lovely. Just like one of those, I wish I'd written that moments as soon as I read that. There you go.
It's got no punctuation in it either, so it makes it kind of, there's no end and no beginning in a way. So
yeah, just on and on.
It's a great poem. It's a great book, actually.
I agree. I really enjoyed it. Yeah.
Alice Oswald, Falling Awake. So today we've got an interview done by Robin talking with Clare Shaw about her excellent book, Flood. Let's hear that.
I'm delighted to be talking with Clare Shaw. Clare is someone who I first met a couple of years ago at the Swindon Festival of Poetry when she was the poet in residence. Something I need to say about Clare is that once you've met her, you never forget her because she has this charisma. It's the only word I can think of. Clare's had 3 collections with Blood Axe, the most recent being Flood, and that is the book we're going to be talking about mostly today because of our weather theme. On the back cover of the book, it says, "The territory of Clare Shaw's 3rd collection isn't one she chose herself, but one which chose her, the flooded valley and the ruined home." So a big welcome to Clare. And Clare, maybe you'd like to start by reading a poem from the book.
I will. I'll start with a poem called "And Still I Don't Know." I still don't know what it was that woke us suddenly, both as one. It wasn't the chimes, it wasn't the neighbours, it wasn't the lights switched on. Maybe the room was too cold, I was shaking, and I think I could see you breathing silver, though it was late summer, and we hadn't worn coats all week. The lamps went out one by one, and now the road was a river of darkness, and there was a thrill like disaster impending, something bigger than joy or pain. And both like that, in our t-shirts and shorts, the cotton still warm from sleep, we walked down the path to the beach, where the sea was sighing and pounding and crashing, and the boats were rocking. Your eyes were creatures, your fingers were darkness, and the sea was all of our past and future, and way, way out there were lights on the water. We hadn't touched all night, but your hand was in mine, and your hair smelled clean, and your skin was a dream.
Thanks, Clare. I think what I really love about starting with that here is because there's something bad coming, there's some sort of anxiety, and yet we've got this tender relationship. The references to the sea and the pounding and the crashing and the dream. I imagine that maybe, but the worst thing sometimes we get a premonition in dreams anyway. So for me, it's a great scene setter.
It's so interesting hearing people's reactions to your poetry. You must know this, and you learn all sorts about what you actually did. That literally was the story of a relationship that didn't happen. And it was really clear to me when it came to ordering the collection that it began at the beginning. The story that's told throughout the collection is the story of a literal flood. It's the floods that happened in Hebden Bridge in 2013 in particular, and then more latterly the floods at the end of 2015. But it absolutely is also the story of a relationship from its beginning to its end. And it's the story of various kind of catastrophic events that leave behind a trail of damage and devastation. But it's also the story of how we kind of survive and come back from those sorts of experiences. So I'm incredibly glad that that's the way that strange little poem operates.
I think that's right, what you said about hearing someone else's interpretation. It is really weird, isn't it? Things come out that maybe weren't intended.
Yeah, the whole point of working with poetry is that we're working with what we don't know. So whatever our intention as writers, we very deliberately have to let go of an element of certainly narrative control. We can only write 10% of what the reader's going to understand, I imagine. The rest of it is up to them.
I like that idea. Only 10% of what the reader's going to understand.
Yeah, it's scientific, isn't it? I've measured it.
I think it is something that aspiring poets, or those of us who are sort of still kind of a bit further down the line, need to really bear in mind. Quite often you go to workshops and somebody will come up with a poem and say, this is what I meant it to mean, or you can tell that they have this one big intention, and you don't get a chance as a reader to really put your own mark on it.
Absolutely. Or that point, particularly again with new writers, you point out a bit that doesn't really work and they're like, but that's what happened. I don't give a damn that that's the truth, because it's not working for the poem, and the poem is the thing, not the bloody truth.
Also, you mentioned about the ordering, I think, just briefly there, or when you're ordering a collection, and it did feel like I was being inundated literally by these waves, because it felt like the tension was building in certain poems to the point where we'd suddenly get to this kind of explosion of fury and grief, and then we'd kind of be let down a little bit, something a bit quieter, something more sort of meditative. And so there's this brilliant wave effect. Am I imagining that, or was that something that you did intend or sort of had half an eye on?
I'm so glad you got that. That's like manna to my ears to mix my metaphors. That's exactly what I was after. In fact, the kind of combination of artist and nerd in me was really drawn to scales of impact. Forgive me while I digress completely. So I really love, the Beaufort scale of wind.
Yeah.
And the way that it measures wind, not by its like miles per hour. It measures it by the impact that it has on things that we'd all recognise. Does it blow an umbrella inside out? Does it make a weather vane spin? And they're beautifully kind of archaic, these images. And I got really interested because my previous work up to this point has been all around mental health. So I spent quite a lot of years working in mental health. I used mental health services for a long time. So I got really interested in the idea of flood as a metaphor for trauma, but also the idea of measuring the impact in the same way that we might measure the impact of trauma. So the idea of the book is a kind of ramping up of measures of impact until we get to the catastrophic damage. And then it's about recovery and resilience as well.
I think you've done it really well. It might be a good point to read us another poem, maybe Instructions for Coping in Terrible Times.
Let's have that one. It's so nice being told what to read because it makes me go for different ones. Instructions for Coping in Terrible Times. Learn to swim. If you have time, secure your home before the expected rain. Pay attention. Floods can happen in minutes. Turn off utilities at the main switches. Avoid any movement that causes pain. When a warning is issued, leave. Control the bleeding. If you are taking cover in a church hall, padlock your bags against theft. Always listen to the instructions authorities give you. Do not be alone. Identify where you can go. A friend in another town, a motel, for example. Keep your gas tank full. Cover the burn with clean, dry dressings. Don't drive through moving currents on the way. If your car stalls in rising waters, abandon it immediately. Accept small favours. Seize every opportunity to stay dry. Take what is brought by the river in your stride. Eat meat if you have to. Do not fall. The weather will change and all damage is relative. If you notice an unfamiliar smell, have it inspected. Write it all down. Be prepared to quit at a moment's notice. Accept what you were entitled to. Do not drown.
Love the way you finish on do not drown. Quite a lot of these poems, although it's it's about trauma, as you say, and it's about terrible things that happened. Somehow there's these moments of dark humour that I think, well, for me anyway, pulls me in. I'm thinking, yeah, okay, I can imagine this sort of instructions listed and you follow them all one by one. So would you agree there's humour in the collection, or is it just literally your personality?
Robin, I'm devastated. No, absolutely. Of course there's humour. But yeah, every place that I've been to, and I do generally write about autobiographical material, there's never been a place where people weren't using humour as a way of getting through. So in my first collection, Straight Ahead, I wrote very directly about some of my times in psychiatric hospital. I spent long periods of time as a patient in psychiatric hospital in my 20s. People were in the worst days that they might ever go through in their lives. But of course we laughed. How else would we get through those times? And I think the same is true with literature. Pure dark, pure light is very difficult to hook into and engage with and absorb. And I guess in some ways it's probably just my personality as well.
There is this section of the book where you bring in, well, Jimmy Savile, let's say the name. You don't bring his name in, but I started reading this little sequence of poems, which is kind of Hansel and Gretel tied up with Jimmy Savile and witnesses to that. And it insinuates itself almost in the way that I can imagine he would have insinuated himself into the lives of these children. I just started reading these poems and I thought, hang on a minute. And I had to go back several poems and read again. I thought, oh my God. Yeah. And I just thought that was done so skillfully. And what a topic to bring in. What brought you to that? I'm interested in that.
Well, you're quite right that it's all done through the sort of trope, if you like, of Hansel and Gretel, which I think is such a disturbing story. And the particular point of reference for me is the leaving the children in the forest. It's the father that leaves the children in the bloody forest. How could you do that? And that, I guess, is the point of connection with my own story. So I was raised in a very large family. There was very little safeguarding or safekeeping. And as a result of that, we were, subject to all sorts of horrible, traumatic experiences. And that's part of the reason I've gone on to always engage with stories around things like trauma and neglect, abuse, and the kind of long-term mental health impact that can have on people. So yeah, very, very personal point of connection with that idea that it's the 60s and 70s, that's what blokes did. We all watched that happening and we didn't take action. Kind of rang a bell with that idea of the woodcutter leaving his own children in a forest to let terrible things happen to them. I think often when we're focused on trauma, we can focus on, the single terrible event, the horrible violence. It's those kind of more nuanced mechanisms that go on around trauma, the not believing or the validating or the shame. They're the really destructive things. And that's why the second book begins with a poem about I don't believe in silence. I do not believe in silence. Because I think the very act of speaking out and listening and witnessing, it's healing for the person that can speak from trauma. But if we as a community can kind of witness it and engage with it, that is in itself transformation. The absolute opposite to what happened with Jimmy Savile. And that's where I think that, poetry can be political activism. That's why poets are in prison in other countries. Because speaking out isn't just something that leads to political action. It is political action.
I noticed that, you're drawn very much to very effective use of repetition of phrases, of particular words, and this comes through in quite a few of the poems. I felt it's almost like an incantation, like you're weaving a spell, and it reminds me of a lot of performance poetry. Do you see those poems as performances when you're writing them, or is there some difference in your mind between a page poem and a performance poem?
I write for the page. That's what I've always written for. But I love reading out. It's my voice. I made it. So I delight in being able to read out. And when I read other people's work, I love to read it out as well. So for me, I feel like I probably belong very passionately to the mid-ground between the page and the performance. I love to write for the page. I love to use every element of the page, the white space, the punctuation, the layout, the line breaks, the stanza breaks. But I love to read the work out as well.
So what poem are you going to read for us? This will be the last poem. I like Open Door Policy. That has a real feel of redemption. We'll talk about it after you've read it anyway.
Open Door Policy. Maybe one day you'll walk through a door inside you. It isn't your home, but you'll be welcomed and asked to stay. There are people in there. Like a gift, they'll receive you, and no one will fear for your health or your teeth, the state of you, how you are a cliff about to fall, and everyone near is in danger. All that you need is a sofa, and maybe the telly on low. There will be no questions, only the lines of sun on the curtains. If you want it, a bed for the night. They heard you before you arrived, and though you've carried your storm to their door, here is calm. You are not high waves or a ship going down. You won't sink with your people inside you. No one will drown. You don't need to be saved or mended. Just somebody's hand on your back, a coffee with milk, some cake. You are not the moon, dragging cold tides behind you. You are not even fire or star. Someone can warm you. Someone can touch you. One day, you'll walk through that door. You'll rest on that sofa. You'll stay there forever.
Oh, I feel myself welling up when you're reading that. There's something really tender and sad but beautiful and comforting about that. I just think it's such a lovely kind of redemptive poem, really moving. So thank you for reading that one.
Oh, thank you for asking. It's one of the quieter poems, so it doesn't get as many outings.
Yeah, and I think that people may read the collection and come away thinking of the really dramatic imagery of the flooding and the trauma. But in fact, these are really beautiful, these quiet poems that come in as well.
Yeah.
So Claire, what are you up to now? What's coming on the horizon?
So at the moment, the collection that I'm finishing is called Towards a General Theory of Love. It's actually the collection that won the Northern Writers' Awards a couple of years back, right at the beginning when it was about a third written. We've got the publication date 2022, because that's the way that Blood Axe works. That year should also be an interesting year for me because I'm working with a composer at the Royal Academy of Music. It's their bicentenary, and we're writing an opera. So I'm now a librettist, and there's a real continuity with the book that we've been talking about, actually, because the opera is all about hidden rivers. So that's been fascinating to research. I love researching for poetry, and I've been writing about the hidden rivers of London. And who knew? Writing about flood. And the idea of the Love collection was, I've spent so much time thinking about things like trauma or flooding or, resilience and survival, yes, but also the things that we have to survive and be resilient about. And I just thought, I just want to write a collection that's about love, inevitably, because I'm writing it. That stuff's coming anyway. There we go, Robin.
That's brilliant. Thank you.
So that was a really great interview with Clare Shaw. I like this idea about a relationship that didn't happen, and that sort of idea of flooding, that welling up of emotion.
Yes.
Almost came from nowhere. It's a lovely metaphor for the whole thing, I think.
Absolutely. And when she reads her work, you can really kind of feel, as you say, this kind of welling up. It's in her. She's alive with her words.
Yeah, and there's something about her language as well that I like. It's not what I describe as sort of baroque or flamboyant. There's a kind of almost in the best possible way, a plainness about it that allows the metaphors to really shine through. Because there is a sort of a continuum, isn't there, when you're reading a poem? And if sometimes you're just constantly distracted by the vocabulary, you forget, actually what the shape of the poem is or what you're supposed to be thinking about. And, you never get that with her work. I think having read the book after you kindly sent it to me, I think, wow, really like her work.
I agree. It's plain language in the sense that there's nothing extraneous there and there's nothing embellished. It's powerful stuff.
I love what she was saying about speaking out is a political action as well.
Yes, absolutely. I thought what she said about that was right on the button, really.
It's empowering as well, this idea that what we say might have an impact.
Something else I thought was interesting was what Claire said about reading her work is a performance, that she writes for the page, but she also loves reading her work aloud. I'm always sort of thinking about what is this performance poetry thing? What is performance versus page poetry? And people are undoubtedly swept along by performance poetry. The hearing it read is often very personal work, and can you separate the work from the person when they're performing? But I think Claire sort of seems to bridge that gap somehow. It's thrilling to see her and hear her read out aloud. But it's also fantastic on the page.
I mean, I think with performance poetry, if there's a thread of the meaning that's quite easy to get the first time round, then that makes a good poem that is good to perform. But that doesn't necessarily preclude there being other layers of meaning underneath it, which can reward you when you read it. I mean, the sort of worst kind of performance poetry, I think, is like you hear it once and it's just like hearing a joke that won't make you laugh the second time because there's nothing else to it. But this is really good poetry that can also be performed really well, I think.
I've got a feeling that this performance poetry discussion is going to run and run, and we'll be talking about it in another episode, I think.
Okay, that's a good idea.
Well, another good idea might be to continue our weather theme. Now, Peter has been talking to Elizabeth Murtough about an ecologically minded literary magazine that's just started in Ireland.
Now based in Dublin, Elizabeth Murtough is a recent graduate of the MPhil in Creative Writing at Trinity College. In 2018, she was selected to participate in the Poetry Island Introduction Series. Her poetry has appeared in numerous magazines and anthologies. With Cassia Gaydon Gilmartin, she launched Channel magazine in April 2019, which Elizabeth has described as a literary journal with an environmental frame. Welcome to the podcast, Elizabeth.
Thank you. Thanks very much for having me.
So I love this statement from Channel Magazine's website where you say, "We believe that humanity's disengagement from the natural world is one of the great losses of our time." Could you say a little bit more about that?
I think for both myself and Cassia, when we were inspired to put the journal together, one of the things that we agreed upon was that this sense of disconnect that people have from one another, from our selves, our higher selves, if you want, it has to do fundamentally with a disconnect from the natural world, a notion that we are separate from the natural world, that we are separate from animals. And as soon as you start creating those hierarchies and separations between self and other, be it self and nasturtium or self and your neighbor, that's where a lot of, in my opinion, in our opinion, social and political issues stem from. Trying to create the means for people to reconnect to the natural world and enjoy that connection and find love within natural spaces is maybe one of the solutions to that, or not a solution maybe, but a way back to something.
I grew up in the Channel Islands and moved to London when I was a young boy. And it just astonished me that, people would think the world was the city. My best friend that I made in London didn't appreciate going into the country. He saw no point.
Part of the reason for forming Channel as well was to give people an introduction to getting to know and enjoy those spaces. because it's just like when you go to somebody's house for the first time, you're a little uncomfortable and you're feeling like, oh, I don't know if I really belong here, and where's the toilet and where's everything, like if you don't have any experience going into natural spaces, it can be very uncomfortable. It can feel like, what am I doing here? What do I pay attention to? I'm bored, or it's hot, or there's bugs. That type of discomfort is understandable, but it just takes time, like, to get to know where you are.
Have you noticed anything about the work you've been sent? Can you draw any conclusions about how people are feeling about the environment and how they understand themselves in terms of the environment?
Yeah, it's really wonderful to get. I mean, it's such a privilege anyway to just get to read like a cross section of contemporary writing, and then for it to have the framework of nature writing, broadly speaking, just to see how people are reflecting upon the natural world. Most people are utterly in love with it, really. A lot of the poetry that we get, I would classify as some form of love poetry, like even if it's for, orchestral, but people are seemingly in awe, is the largest theme. And then, you get a massive amount of concern as well, frustration, fear. It really runs the whole range of anything else that people write about. People are writing just as passionately with those themes about nature as well. So that's been great to see.
We're living in an age of identity politics at the moment, where people are examining, shared experiences of injustice and exploring various aspects of their own identity. Sometimes I wonder how this connects with, concerns about the environment. Do you see them as talking to each other at all, or is it a completely different debate?
I think that all of these issues that are in the public conversation, they're all deeply connected, fundamentally connected. Environmentalism and race politics, gender politics, it all comes from, again, I would argue, that disconnect that people have once you separate yourself from being a part of this larger ecosystem that relies on each part functioning to its fullest and to its healthiest in order to just at a baseline support life. Like, we have to allow all of these different areas to flourish. We can't have one dampened or oppressed. We can't be burning, clear-cutting forests, and we can't be hurting Black people. We can't be hurting women. So the impulse to control and to destroy the environment is the same as the impulses behind a lot of the issues around identity politics. So we've got a deeper thing to get to here. That'll solve all of them, ideally.
This is an obsession of mine now, but I'm thinking about W.B. Yeats, and who was a big hero to me, especially when I first started reading poetry, and the Irish literary Renaissance, which certainly in its early phase wove legend and Irish landscape to provide a fresh way for Ireland's writers to think about themselves and their own identities. I wonder if, because you're from the States originally, aren't you?
Yeah.
I wonder if you find that Ireland has an especially rich soil for launching a magazine like yours.
I suppose I lack a certain frame of comparison because I've never tried to do this anywhere but here. I wasn't that involved in the literary scene in California before I left. I kind of came into that once I moved here. But I would still say this country, especially with the independent publishing scene, is so rich for people helping each other, supporting each other. When we decided to launch the magazine, we reached out to a couple of other prominent magazines, Banshee being one of them, and they just gave us basically a step-by-step how-to guide, how to launch this. And we received
that's great.
They were super supportive, and then writers all across the place were really supportive of the project, it being specifically an environmentalist theme. And I suppose the Irish mythology and Irish writing generally tends to have a particular attention towards land and towards place as well. So maybe it was particularly well set up within Ireland to do this type of project. So yes, is my long answer.
I love Ireland. I've been there about 7 or 8 times, but you can smell the literature in the air, can't you, when you get there? I find it such an inspiring place. You're a Channel magazine at the moment. It's currently print only, isn't it? But you've got a blog on your website that features poems that you published previously. You're taking essays, stories, and poems. Are you open to people from across the planet sending you work? Not wishing you to be utterly deluged, but have you got sort of international ambitions, or are you firmly rooted in Ireland?
Yes, we have been open to international submissions since we launched, and we actually receive a great number of international submissions. We get a lot of submissions from the UK and from the US, but we also receive submissions from all over Europe, from the Philippines, from Nigeria, from India and Pakistan. So unfortunately, we only read poems in English, although we're also open to publishing poems in translation. That's just because we can really only judge work that is in English because we only speak English. But we are welcoming of submissions all over the place. It's really, it's a global problem, the way that we are currently living in nature. And so it's going to take a whole global paradigm shift to do something new with that. So it is a global project.
Yeah. I find there's, especially in English poetry I'm talking about now, a kind of defeatism. I think it's sort of condensed in that poem that Auden wrote about Yeats, and in which he says that, poetry makes nothing happen, which always seems to be a bit absurd. He was writing about Yeats, who, won a Nobel Prize and was a member of the Senate and made all kinds of things happen. What sort of influence do you want to exert with this magazine? And do you think you can contribute to making something happen? And if so, how?
I suppose it started as a thing to do to contribute to some type of greater good, was the idea. Just these are certain skills that both of us had. We shared a concern for the natural world and thought, well, we can make something. Creativity makes things happen. And when you put creative work out there, especially something like a magazine, you're just really creating a platform for other people to keep creating. And the idea being the more that we are creating, the more we are in that practice and that framework of thinking about the natural world, writing about it, being a part of it, the more likely we are to do the necessary things to protect it and thereby protect each other and ourselves, since we're all part of it.
I think there's something quite straightforward about people being able to recognize that other people feel the way they do as well. Your magazine literally channels that, doesn't it? It channels that togetherness. Elizabeth, thank you so much for talking to us on this podcast. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you so much for having me.
I can only wish you well with Channel Magazine. I advise people to surf by and maybe pick up a hard copy or send off for one.
So I was fascinated what Elizabeth had to say about she felt that all social and political issues stem from the fact that there's this separation between ourselves and everything else, humans versus the natural world, as if we weren't actually part of that world, and more generally between self and other. And I just thought that was just such a really intelligent and interesting route in.
Yeah, it's good to have such a thoughtful kind of stance. I mean, I think it really helps to give yourself a brief like that, really.
Yes, and it was interesting that she said that it was that other magazines in Ireland were very supportive of it and helped them get going. Just gives me this sort of warm feeling about the state of poetry in Ireland.
I think it's great. I mean, and also because there's so little money or anything in poetry, why not, help each other out and be more collaborative? I think, it helps everyone, doesn't it? It builds connections.
She sounds like someone who's got a huge number of ideas and is going about it in a marvellous way. I haven't actually seen the magazine, but certainly from the website, it looks very professional, and I'm not surprised they've been inundated with submissions because
all around the globe. Yeah,
no,
it's really
it looks
cool.
great.
They've just released the second issue, I think, so it's a flying start already. And it's interesting, they're only doing print only at the moment too.
Yes,
there is something about having a slim volume in your hands, I think, sitting in a cafe.
I agree.
somewhere.
I agree, and there's just something lovely about the artifact of a poetry magazine. You know, some more than others, obviously, but I just had through the post, for example, the new 14, which is a magazine that existed, but then it sort of closed, and it's been taken on by Richard Skinner, and I think he's only planning to do one issue a year. But it's a beautiful thing, you know. It's a square format. The amount of space around each poem, and when you've got poems of 14 lines, you know pretty much how much space they're going to take on the page. So the square format is.
Are they sonnets?
They're not all sonnets, but they're certainly all 14 lines.
Yeah.
Therein lies another discussion, isn't it?
That's a thorny issue, isn't it? Right there.
A thorny issue. I'll get out my Don Patterson sonnets in a minute.